All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're welcoming you to another continuation of our series and are so thankful that you have taken the time to spend this time with us. I want to go ahead and introduce we'll talk about the series and talk a bit about who's sponsoring the series, and then we'll talk about today's session. So definitely want to begin by welcoming you to the CAAASA, UCLA, CCEE, Advancing Equity in an Era of Crisis webinar series. The California Association of African American Superintendents and Administrators, or CAAASA, and the University of California, Los Angeles Center for the Transformation of Schools put this project together to support equity in virtual learning as we all shelter in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. This work has been made possible by the generous support of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, or CCEE, and we are grateful for their partnership on behalf of California's K-12 public school students. You may be, well, obviously, those of you who are on now are watching this live. Some of you may be watching later this recording. And I just want to let you know that whether you're watching live today or watching later, I would love for you to complete the survey that we'll distribute at the end of the session. It's really vital to us to have feedback from participants to make sure that we're meeting your needs. So if you wouldn't mind answering the survey when I put the link in the chat at the end of the session, we'd greatly appreciate it. We're going to have the opportunity for you to ask questions about the session. So please go ahead and do that as in the chat as we're proceeding with today's session. Please note too that when you're putting your question or comments in the chat, if you want everyone to see, you need to make sure you indicate to all panelists and all attendees so that everyone can see your questions. And especially if you choose to share resources with one another, we want everyone to be able to benefit from that. We also want to let you know that at the end of today's session, you'll receive a link to the website where the recording for today is going to be available, as well as the session resources. And finally, before I talk about today's session, we want to let you know that we believe so firmly that every question, concern, and comment and suggestion is valuable. And so we've created a portal where you'll be able to submit your questions after today's session, and then within 48 hours, an expert will get back to you with an answer to your question. So I want to definitely introduce you to those components first, and then want to talk about today's session in particular. So let me go ahead and navigate to today's session information. It's shifted on my screen a bit, so hold on one second. All right, so today's session is establishing protocols for online teaching and learning for urban and rural students. And today we have Dr. Michele Bowers, who's the superintendent for Lancaster Unified School District. We have Lorrie Owens, who is the past president and board of directors for CITE, or formerly it was called, is it CETPA? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, so hopefully that's not CETPA, okay.
That's why we changed the name.
And we also have with us today Dr. Sharla Berry, who's an educational researcher. I'm going to go ahead and pass the session off to our facilitators today, and please know that I'll be here present throughout the whole session to read your comments and questions in the chat as well, and I'll come back and close this out at the end. So I'll pass it on to you, ladies. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, I would like to say welcome on behalf of Southern California. I see a lot of my friends, familiar names, and I can't say faces just yet, but I do recognize a lot of those names. So thank you for choosing to join us today. It is an important conversation, and I am very pleased and honored to be joined by two wonderful colleagues, both Sharla and Lorrie, and I'm sure you will find the conversation very rich and very rewarding. The context, just to set the context for you just a little bit, where have we been? Well, it has been a very full 8-9 weeks. I'm losing track now. I am so losing track because so very much has happened in such a short period of time. Black Friday has a whole different context for me now because Friday, March 10th was kind of the day the world changed in education for us here in Southern California. And that was a day, a very important day, where many of us found ourselves having to make some very difficult decisions and choices based on concerns about the pandemic. So many schools, my district included, made the determination and decision to close school. And that was something that none of us had ever been faced with before. So as a superintendent, I will tell you, this is my 8th year as superintendent. I'm the proud superintendent of an elementary district, about 15,000 students, 22 schools in comparison. There are many districts smaller, several districts larger than mine, But for any size district, this was a critically important decision. And the reason why is because we had never been faced with anything like this emergency. Give us an earthquake, give us a fire, give us those emergencies, we can handle those. We have plans for those. None of us really had a plan in place to respond to a pandemic and this type of concern and emergency where we would be faced with closing schools for any period of time. At that time, we thought it was going to be a short period of time. And unbeknownst to us, that got extended and extended. And here we are about 9 weeks later, preparing to slide into the end of the school year. So what does that mean? That means that we had to shift our thinking about everything that we knew, everything we thought we knew, the way we did things. So we had to shift our thinking about teaching and learning. We had to shift our thinking about accountability. We had to shift our thinking about support, how we support our students. So what does that look like for our general ed students, for our special education students, for our foster youth, for our homeless youth? What does that look like for our preschool babies and the parents that are accustomed to having their child go someplace for 3 hours a day or 6 hours a day? How do we support those families when now they find themselves not only having to care for their child being at home, but having to teach their child at home? So this was a different shift, definitely, for everyone. It was a shift for our staff members as well, because after you get over the initial shock and maybe celebration of, hey, I got 5 days off. Some people I'm sure were feeling that, but then you have the reality of, well, when we come back and this whole remote learning system, distance learning, what is that going to look like? So I would say that many districts across the US, not just in California, and definitely not just in little old Lancaster here, but we were faced with having to kind of reinvent how we do business and reinventing it not necessarily with a long-term plan, but more of a short-term situation. So we were just kind of putting a Band-Aid on getting through to the next little period of time. It's like, okay, close for a couple weeks, we'll be okay. Close for a month, we'll still be okay. Now it's closed through the end of the year. And I think more importantly is the where are we going? Now we're faced with having an extended safer at home order in many areas and looking at closures that may extend well into, or at least reframing how we do business well into the end of July or early August. And that is definitely going to impact what reopening schools looks like. So the difference is we were responding to an emergency in March. Now we have an opportunity to really think about how we prepare for a different way of teaching, a different way of learning for our students. And it's going to take the help of my friends here because they have lived in the world of technology and remote learning for a very long time. And I think while we have done we've made lots of progress in many areas with integrating technology, this is far more than just integrating technology into the way we always do business. This is a new way of doing business. So with that said, I'm going to kind of pass the mic here to Sharla.
Great. Thank you so much, Michele. So, hi, as mentioned, I'm Sharla Berry. I am an assistant professor at California Lutheran University, which is in Southern California, Thousand Oaks, so right outside of Los Angeles. I have been doing educational research about technology and online learning for a few years. So I want to share with you some of the thinking from my research. Prior to this, I was an elementary school teacher, so I really empathize with those of you who are in the field, in the front lines, or those of you who are education leaders, because as Michele said, the one word we're all tired of hearing, unprecedented, well, here we are. This is truly unprecedented. Yet we will get through this. And so just want to share with you some things to kind of frame your thinking before we launch into a discussion. So where are we? So as Michele kind of mentioned, we are in this emergency stage. We've been engaging in emergency remote teaching. And what is that? Well, in contrast to kind of plan, where we have planned from the beginning to the end to be online, emergency remote teaching is this temporary shift of instructional delivery to alternative delivery due to crisis circumstances. So this is really important because emergency remote teaching is really just about staying afloat. It's not about recreating everything that we do and putting it online, but it's about providing temporary access to supports in ways that are quick and accessible during a crisis. However, we know that we cannot live in a crisis mode forever, right? I'm sure that many of us don't want to go through a fall that is like the spring that we had. So we're making some adjustments. We're moving toward a field of online teaching and learning, at least in the kind of immediate short sense. What is online teaching and learning? That's where you're purposefully designing your courses so that they are meant to be housed online. That is where you're using some of the best practices for online teaching and learning. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So whether you are engaged in emergency remote instruction, or online teaching and learning, I believe that community is at the center of effective teaching based on the research that I have done. So a community is a supportive social group where members have a sense of belonging and trust. In a learning community, members work collaboratively to provide academic, social, and emotional support to each other. And we know that when students aren't getting those emotional and social needs met, that learning is very hard for them to access, which is why I want us to always be thinking about community at the center of our teaching with technology. We also know that having a sense of community has academic, social, and emotional benefits. So emotionally, people that feel like they're in a community experience decreased isolation, increased ability to manage stress, and just a stronger sense of belonging and greater overall emotional well-being. And we know that especially during this time of crisis and panic, those emotional needs are very, very important. Academically, when students feel like they're in a community, they're more likely to participate, the engagement is deeper, and they're more likely to stay, which is also something that we're facing during this crisis, right? Attrition can be really high as folks really aren't logging on. If they feel like they're connected to a learning community, they're more likely to do that and stay engaged. So a framework that you can use to kind of think about effective online teaching is this TPACK framework that Kohler and Mishra have a few publications about. And so they argue that effective online teaching is not just about technical knowledge. And I know we've all been kind of struggling to figure out how to work Zoom and how to use all of these apps, but that's really only one part of online teaching. There's a technical knowledge, which we're all building, the content knowledge which our teachers already have, and that pedagogical knowledge, really, and that's what's emerging right now. So what that really refers to is this kind of deeper knowledge about the processes, practices, and methods of teaching and learning. And many of us, especially in the K-12 space, never really taught online. So this is very, very new. We have to think about how our students learn. We have to think about what classroom management looks like, lesson planning, and assessment, all of these things. And so again, a lot of this is uncharted territory. So I think that, we really want to take a balanced approach, but I really like pointing this out just because, again, online learning, it's not just about that technology. Technology is a critical part, but that pedagogy, how do you engage your diverse group of students? That is really what makes the difference. So something to think about when we engage with the students are these ideas of bandwidth and immediacy. So bandwidth really is about kind of like your internet speed and your ability to use technology to make connections. I know that a lot of students are dealing with bandwidth issues, right? They may not have internet at home, or they may not have high-speed internet. So what that means is that tasks like the one we are engaged in, right, which is synchronous, you can see me in some Zoom calls, I can see you, that requires a lot of bandwidth. I know I've even been presenting in webinars where like my screen will just cut off or something like that. That's because I don't have that high quality corporate access that I had when I was working in my office. So a lot of your students may also kind of have bandwidth issues. And it's important as we plan for the fall to think about how we're going to support that. I encourage educators and districts to kind of do a digital needs assessment. And a lot of districts are doing really great work at making sure students have access to those devices. But it's not just about access to devices, it's about access to internet, access to stable internet that can support live streaming, or if you're watching videos or even using YouTube or things like that. So based on the research, I would encourage you to kind of have a mix of higher bandwidth tasks like live video presentations and lower bandwidth tasks like email or discussion boards, or even content that students can read and write about and share at a later time, just to make sure that folks have different access points in how they're using that technology. There are also, in the blue, you kind of see some lower bandwidth tasks that provide you with a lot of immediacy, which is a lot of connection. So those are collaborative documents like Google Docs, or even group chat and messaging, especially in the upper grades if folks have access to phones, right? So it's about being creative, and it's about thinking about that technology from multiple angles, which I know Lorrie will really be able to speak to. But just something for you to keep in mind, right? How are your students accessing the technology? So, again, bringing us back to this idea of community, when you're teaching online, you want it to be accessible, right? So to have a mix of these high and low bandwidth tasks. If your entire school day focuses on online streaming, depending on your students, you may actually lose students who don't, again, have access to that strong and stable internet. So something to keep in mind. You still want to be culturally and contextually relevant, right? We don't want to lose those things in service of technology, but always, 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 how are we connecting to the needs of our students? To be flexible and adaptive. And I know that folks have been switching from week to week to week how they are, teaching, and hopefully we have a lot more stability in the fall. But at the same time, it's really important that we are flexible. I think collaboration is still important in this online space. A lot of times we're focused on what we can do individually with our individual computers, but the cool thing is technology allows us to connect. And we know from the research that when students connect, they're more likely to be engaged. It's also really important to be multimodal. So what that means is that in addition to using the visual technology, like we can see each other, it's important to use a chat if you're in a live session. It's important to use breakout rooms to facilitate small group discussions. It's important to use video and other creative mix, right? You don't want to just lecture all day online. That's hard enough in person, even harder at a distance. And then finally, you want to include some higher order thinking tasks. So I really like this graphic, and it's from Bloom's digital taxonomy. I know we talk a lot about Bloom's taxonomy for learning, and this is a digital taxonomy, which really, you see at the bottom in the purple, these tasks that really kind of require what we call those lower order or more basic skills. So just like kind of Googling things, bookmarking things, or searching things. That doesn't really produce a lot of higher order thinking in the long term. So we want our online learning to move beyond just looking for information on the internet. As we move up toward the green, we see things like mind mapping, surveying, linking, making those connections, validating. We've all heard a lot about fake news, right? How can students use technology and information to kind of validate and verify sources to make sure things are correct? And then moving up even higher, I think it's really important. As we think about online learning, we don't necessarily want to just think about what we can do with using a computer to learn, but how can students be creative with technology, right? How might they blog? How might they film things to document their experience even during a pandemic? How might they create their own podcasts, create their own movies and things like this? It would be really great if students could lead this time not only knowing how to use web conference software, but also to create the technologies that they would deem important for their futures. So incorporating the higher order kind of digital skills is important. Also remember that assignments and activities that connect to personal interest and career goals also really boost kind of cognitive engagement in this community. Again, that requires us to reshift some of what we're doing, but I think that content that's really focused on creativity in the present moment really offers a great opportunity for us to think about how we use technology. So I just wanted to kind of share with you just some general information about some things we can be thinking about in the research. But now we'll move into more of a discussion. And then those of you who are also in the chat, please feel free to kind of log in and to type any questions. But really, I'd like to ask, the other colleagues on the panel, what are some things that teachers should be thinking about in the fall?
Well, Lorrie, I'm going to give you an opportunity to jump in here.
All right, thank you. Again, I'm Lorrie Owens, and I am the past president of California IT and Education, but in my day job, I am the Chief Technology Officer for the San Mateo County Office of Education. So I'm bringing a little bit different perspective, kind of the wirehead perspective to this discussion. And as I think about from my perspective, what teachers should be thinking about right now is first and foremost that what they've been thrown into is going to, and I think everybody knows we're not going back to the way things were completely. There is going to be a technology component, even more so in the teaching and the learning experiences of students, especially as we're looking at social distancing for a while. What is that going to look like? And there are a lot of questions that are not being, have been answered yet. But one of the things as I thought about the plethora of things, and there's so many that teachers might be thinking about, as well as school site administrators and district leaders, is just some of the really mundane, unsexy pieces of how the technology works and how students have access to it. For example, many organizations, LEAs, handed out Chromebooks or some other devices, depending on what was available and what students' needs are. And many handed out hotspots, and that's been, the devices that are allowing students to connect to internet. And that's been a very challenging thing for a whole lot of LEAs. And as we're moving into the fall, we need to really be thinking about how our students as well as instructors support it just from the technical perspective. So in other words, a student who's now dependent, who may be spending part of his or her time learning at home or in a remote location, as opposed to spending the 6 hours a day that they used to spend at school, the device goes out. So have we thought about how are we supporting that? Before, if a device went out and students in the classroom, you call tech support, they come in, they fix it, or they get another one and swap it out. But the student now is at home, and again, a big part of that curriculum is dependent on that student being able to access the curriculum through that device. So what has been put in place to allow that student to quickly get support? I mean, is there a way for that student to call, or that parent to call? Do they bring the device to a place? Are there enough devices where you can do a hot swap? What happens if the student can't get to the district office or to the school? So there's a whole underlying issue that has to be kind of looked at, because all of what we're talking about, and I really love the discussion and the research that Dr. Berry just presented to us, but foundationally is if those devices don't work, if the hotspots don't work. I know we've had a situation where we distributed hotspots and they didn't work. So how do we support the students? How do we support teachers quickly when that happens? Another issue to look at has to do with, and again, I'm addressing the question from all three levels, teachers, site administrators, and district leaders, are all of the various student data privacy laws, CITPA, COPA, all of those laws, and how that really sometimes feels like that it's getting in the way of instruction. And how can we use our technology departments to help not just say, no, you can't do that, but find solutions to help support the instruction, but still be within the confines of the law as it relates to the devices that we are distributing. One example I will use from real life is that we had a very generous donation from a community partner of hotspots, but there was no, because they were older, there was not an easy way to technically protect those hotspots. So we can't just hand out the hotspots, that's a violation of CITPA, without some type of protection. So those types of things, again, they're not pleasant, they're not fun, they're not sexy, but we have to deal with those foundational things to make sure that the students are protected, that they're getting devices that work, and that is not an impediment to their learning in what is going to be a very, very different way than what they and their parents and many teachers and administrators are used to.
I'm just going to jump in and add we have learned a lot in the last few weeks. And I appreciate the comments and the research from both Dr. Berry and from Mrs. Owens that we don't have all the answers as of yet because we're continuing to learn. This is a work in progress. And what we are discovering, I will just say as a matter of practice, we are discovering there are some challenges. I will say here in Lancaster, access is a challenge. We have a very significant number of low socioeconomic families that did not have access to technology or access to the internet or hotspots, and we also had to purchase a lot. But one of the things that we found, that we discovered, was that we have some remote areas that didn't work in. So how do we support those families? And then once you do have the technology in the home, not all of the students have someone to support them that understands how to use the technology or how to hook up the technology or how to make it work in their home. So then what? How do we respond to that? So I think these are some of the things some of the questions that we have an opportunity to address as we start thinking about and planning for fall reopening, because the reopening has to be better than the emergency response. And not that the emergency response wasn't good. I think the emergency response did what it was designed to do. It was continuous learning, an opportunity for us to do something to continue learning for students. But as we think about what that needs to look like come August or September, whenever districts are coming back, we have to do more for our students, and especially our students of poverty, especially our students of color, because that's where we see the inequities, that's where we see disparities. And that is where we know we have to kind of push and address and go above and beyond what we normally do, one size fits all, because when it comes to technology and the utilization of that as a key component in teaching and learning, it's not one size fits all, because those technology skills vary. Another question, and maybe Sharla and Lorrie, you have some input on this, but there's a lot of discussion around how much time is too much time on technology for students in a day. So what does the research say about that? Because as I look at students all the way from age 3 and 4 on up, obviously that's going to differ, but the technology literacy skills differ, as well as access, just the ability to understand, to read the instructions and know what to do and how to navigate various programs. But we know kids can spend hours on end playing games. But what is the recommendation when it comes to utilizing technology in this manner based on age and based on time?
Right. Well, I think that's a great question. And I'm sure, Lorrie, you have some great insight on that. I know that, Kaiser Health Foundation and other groups, have put prior to the pandemic, recommendations for limiting screen time. We know that it could cause challenges visually. We know that there's ergonomic challenges, and more students are coming in with kind of hand issues, neck issues, back issues because of all of the time spent on the screens. That being said, we're all now in this predicament where our entire world is on this computer or on this phone, right? Our social connections, our academic, our work. So I do think educators, we can all be a little bit sensitive to that. Some folks really want to replicate their entire school day as is. So if we were 8 to 3, we need to be 8 to 3 and have all of our class periods and stuff. And I think kind of what we're arriving at is, what are some contexts where that's not feasible? You know, we don't always think about our rural students, our remote students, and we don't always think about Black students as living in a rural or semi-remote context. But as you brought up, not everyone lives in a big city where there's access to working hotspots. So for them to be on online 8 or 9 or 10 hours a day is not always feasible. Also, just remembering that while parents have multiple children in the home, right? So I might have an elementary school child and a high school age child using the same Wi-Fi, you know, draining that bandwidth. I might be looking for a job myself, you know, so that is also presents different kinds of challenges in the home. So I think we need to be sensitive and give ourselves the freedom to design around whatever learning looks like in our district. The one size all approach really is no longer going to work, and we can really get creative. But I'm curious, Lorrie, what are your thoughts?
Well, Dr. Berry, I would only have to echo what you said in terms of there were pre-COVID-19 guidelines regarding how much screen time students at various age levels should spend, or how much time they should spend in front of the screen. And I think to some degree, especially during this emergency time, that obviously is kind of a little bit thrown out the window. But as we're talking about how to redesign instruction, as we're looking at, and we were a little bit more, have the opportunity to be a little bit more intentional going into the fall, that the very things that you're talking about, Dr. Berry and Dr. Bowers, has to be something that's considered, because even though I'm in the field of technology and I sit in front of a screen all day, every day, that is not something that's healthy for students. And if we are looking at the whole online learning being a component of how students are learning, and it is going to have to be for a while, if not forever, we have to look at redesigning ways that students can spend a portion of their learning hours in front of the screen, and other things that they can do to learn that is away from the screen. And that is a matter of the design that you were talking about, Dr. Berry, and it has to really be thought out, and it's intentional, and it's a whole lot more work on teachers. This is a whole different mindset than what existed, you know, just 2-3 months ago. But I think that some of those guidelines will be rewritten to accommodate for the fact that we have this hybrid method of teaching and learning that will be with us probably forever. And again, how my question as a technologist is, how do we as technologists help support that? How do we help educators to figure out ways that are going to be healthy for students, but still utilizing the resources that we have available and that we need to have available to educate our students in a totally different environment. So,
right. And I think too, this is an opportunity for us to look at some of our older technologies as well and how they might support us. So I remember when I was in school, they had books on tape, and you know, you play the tape and there'd be questions at the end and things like that. But that's actually a remote learning kind of tool that we could use in districts to expand access, right? The good thing about a book on tape or a book on CD or even a book that's an audio file is that everyone doesn't have to access it at the same same time. Folks can start and stop as they have access to technologies. They can have kind of a guide or support person with them in the home that can also listen to this content, and it can be more accessible. So everything that we do with technology does not have to be online learning. Again, you know, it might involve using podcasts, or might involve using audio files, or even CDs, or I don't know if folks still have DVDs, but, you know, CDs or other types of technologies, even things with television, you know, and that really gets into surveying your population. But I also think that addresses something Keisha White put in the comments, is that there are some folks that are really nervous to be online. So there might be some other ways to use technology where students can still participate without having to be on the internet per se. So I think our next part of our discussion is, you know, what are some things that school site administrators should be thinking about? Again, this is also a lot of work for them. So I know, you know, Dr. Bowers, you've mentioned all the learning that's taking place. How might folks use that learning to move forward?
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of learning that's taking place, and there's a lot that needs to take place. So there's not only the technology, the tool itself, but all of the various platforms. There's so many different software programs and various tools that we were using, but not to the depth that we're using them now, that we're relying on them now. So that is the entire way we look at curriculum and supplemental materials is changing, because a lot of that is now really solely being relied on through the internet or through an online or web-based device. So as we start thinking at school site level, we need to think about the whole child, and we need to think about the whole person as far as our staff members go. Because while we're talking about technology, this shift in paradigm and how we do business has an impact. Someone mentioned earlier about the social and emotional component that goes along with it, because we're taking kids out of an environment where socialization was a big part of what they do on a day-to-day basis. They go to a school setting, it's a safe place. They get their breakfast, they get their lunch, it's a safe place. They have a routine. They know what to count on. They have their friends there. And now with our response to Safer at Home and our response to the pandemic, not only do they have to do all their work at home, but that's pretty much where they are the majority of the time. So as school site administrators and even as district leaders, we have to start thinking about the needs of the whole child, not just the access to the technology, but what is that going to look like? Because we know that it can't just be, here's your assignment, go to this software program and do this for 2 hours, because our kids will be behind. Now, there are some families that have the resources, and the resources meaning human resources, not just access to technology, but people that feel comfortable, that have the time to sit down, to navigate that with them, to make meaning out of what they're seeing on the screen or what they're engaging in, that have the tools to supplement what's happening on the screen and be able to bring in some more project-based learning opportunities or real life experiences that the kids can be exposed to. But I will tell you, as we think about planning for this, our teacher preparation programs, our school administrator preparation programs don't prepare us for this. So that is a different way of learning. And you're in the university system, so I'm going to put my plea in now to have folks start rethinking about what is it that we need to do to really prepare our educators for this level of learning, because I think we're still preparing people for the way we did business prior to March 10th, for the most part, with slightly some integration to supplement or complement the technology. That's the way technology was looked at. It was not the primary. It was always supplemental or secondary. But now we have to really look at the reality that there's a good chance as we move forward that the technology is going to continue to be a primary staple in education. And we're not going to go back to the book, the textbook scenario as we are familiar and comfortable with it. So we have to think about that. The other issue that we have to think about is the health and safety. As we think about reopening schools, I will tell you that that is a significant part of what is consuming us, because as we think about reopening schools, it's not just reopening the doors and saying, come back, we're ready, because we have to make sure we have access to the learning tools, but we also have to make sure that students are coming back and staff are coming back to a healthy and safe environment. So how do we continue to honor and be sensitive to concerns about social distancing and practicing those protocols? And what does that look like if students are going to share devices? What does that look like as they think about socializing? What does that look like as things go home and come back that may need to be repaired, or we need to engage with students or families to help support them in fixing something or addressing something? How do we get people to feel comfortable, and how do we ensure that we're not putting anyone at risk? So that the health and safety, the social emotional component, those are big pieces. I think the training, the professional development is a big piece, but I will also add the support and training for the parents, for the families, it does not get as much attention as I believe it needs to have, especially in this climate, because we can't just put a device. It could be the state-of-the-art equipment, but you can give me a state-of-the-art phone, and I probably am going to be able to answer my email and make a call if I'm lucky. But you give it to some other young person and they're like, oh, it does this and it does that and it does this. So oftentimes our kids go home and they may not have the support. And when you think about your TPAC framework, the technical support, the content support, the pedagogy, that's not what our parents do. That has not been their responsibility. So we are adding some very big ticket items to their plate of responsibility. So what does that support look like for them? Because if we want our kids to be successful, we really have to be intentional about how we support our parents so that they too may be successful. One of the things that we are looking at in my district is we have partnered with UCLA, and I'm very proud of that partnership and very excited. It's something new, just kind of thinking outside of the box. But in thinking, in an effort to address that question, because it has been something on my heart, we actually have partnered with UCLA, and they have students that serve as mentors or support chairs to the parents. So if the parents get stuck, they have a hotline number that they can call, and they will get someone on the other line that has expertise in a particular content area or technology or whatever it is. So whatever your niche is, that's what you sign up to support parents in. And it's working very well. We're excited about it. But now parents may feel comfortable because they don't typically call the teacher or reach out to the teacher. Sometimes they do, but it's not the same as going to someone else and just saying, hey, speak my language, I need some help. You know, and you don't want to tell your child, I don't know how to do this. So we're really trying to think of other ways that we can be sensitive to supporting folks without you having to say, I can't do it. We recognize that when you think about all of these different pieces, you may not come to the table, whether that's a parent or whether that's staff members. We may not come to the table with expertise in all of those areas, technical, content, pedagogy. There are a few of us that do. So looking at places that we can identify to get some additional training, whether that's through coaches. Sometimes we have educational coaches, even they need to be coached up. So site administrators, district leaders, we need to look at ways that we can support the people that are going to be on the front line, making a difference for our kiddos, because they're the ones that are working with them every day. And it does present some unique challenges because it's new learning all the way around.
Dr. Bowers, just wanted to say, first of all, I wish I had access to a support like that, even though it's not connected with technology when mine were younger, because even being a technologist and supposedly having a basis, educational basis, there were times my kids came to me and I didn't have a clue. So yeah, and all the technical stuff to that, I definitely can feel for what a lot of parents of school-age kids are going through right now. I just want to add also one piece that I think that site administrators, and again, as well as district leaders may need to be thinking about, and it's kind of a dark side, and again, it comes from that area of technology that no one likes to think about. But one of the things that we have seen in the technical area, in just since the whole COVID-19 thing emerged, is an increase in hackers, an increase in the bad guys out there trying to use this change in how we are connecting with our students to damage our networks at the schools, to get through to our kids. Because if you think about it like a house, if you have all of your windows and all of your doors locked, it still can be broken into, but it's harder. But what we've had to do technically to allow for distance learning, remote learning, is open some windows, open some doors. We've had to, allow some access through various channels that we didn't before. Now, much of that is across or through the cloud, and there are some protections there, but some of it is not. And I can tell you right now, the increase in the amount of attempts that our administrators don't see and our district leaders don't see, but your technology people are seeing, it's been phenomenally crazy. And one of the things that we on the technology side don't want to do is burden you with all of, you wouldn't believe how many DDoS attempts we got today in terms of people trying to get through to email, trying to get through various chat tools, but they're out there. And one of the things that I would suggest with site administrators and district leaders in particular is having some of those conversations to find out, are there additional tools? And I know that the money's not, no one's rolling in money right now, but are there additional tools that we're going to be needing to invest in, especially when our students are back in the classrooms, because those are the networks, the classroom networks are the ones that are being attacked. And you need to know about it as an administrator, even though you don't want to have, that's not the forefront of what you're looking at, but you do need to know that those attacks are being attempted, and where tools and techniques and more knowledge are helpful to try to thwart those, that we need to be doing that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that also makes a good point, Lorrie, for being judicious in how we select technologies. And again, folks always ask me, well, what app should I use and what this? And it's about quality and not quantity. And also there might be some trade-offs when we're using so many different technologies at the same time, and we haven't really properly vetted them. You know, higher ed is experiencing the same thing. Someone said the word Zoom, and then everyone started using Zoom all the time. Why? I don't know. You know, there's so many different web conferencing softwares, and Zoom had a lot of security flaws, and there were these Zoom bombings and things, and we learned about that, you know, all together, and folks will be more prepared for the fall. But the point is for us to just really be judicious and take somewhat of a cautious approach as we look at technologies, talk to other education leaders, try to find out those gaps and loopholes, and be thinking about security and safety, and then communicating that to the parents, right? Because a lot of folks are rightfully nervous, and we need to be sharing with them what steps we're taking to make sure that children are safe on the internet and as they use these technologies. So this kind of really rolls into a question that we have, and we've kind of already addressed it, but are there any other emerging trends or challenges or opportunities with technology that are worth kind of considering and bringing up?
Well, I would like to just suggest that, you know, as we're moving forward, not only just looking at the fall, but looking at the changing face of education, K-12 education in our state and in our nation, that going back to the issue of broadband access, and one of the things that a lot of us who have been in educational technology have known for our entire careers is that technology is either the great equalizer or it is it enhances the digital divide more than ever. And I think we've seen that big time in the last 2.5 months. Equity is something that needs to underscore everything that we're looking at when we're talking about the various tools that we're going to be utilizing in helping to deliver education to students. But one of the things that, and this is just Lorrie speaking, that I really feel that we as an education community at the site level, at the district level, at the state level, is to look at the role of the community in helping to provide access to the internet. It is no longer to be ubiquitous access to.
Did we lose Lorrie?
I think we may have lost her. I don't know if it's like temporary or if she has to reconnect.
I'm not sure. Lorrie, we don't have your video, your
Yep.
audio or video. You're frozen there. So
It's where we're in rural areas that isn't even something that can be used. There is a responsibility of the larger community to help provide this access across the board. Schools cannot do it by themselves. And so we really do need to be talking to community leaders. We need to be talking to Silicon Valley. We need to be talking to legislators. We need to really kind of come together and say that, you know, we need this entire society to step up and provide this access, because K-12 cannot do it alone.
I want to say amen to that, especially after I just got the budget. It's my goodness gracious. There is a lot, there are a lot of resources. We have a lot of challenges that we're facing, but I so agree with everything that you're saying. It's been around long enough. You know, it wasn't that long ago that cell phones were not something everyone had access to. But today, I would say pretty much everyone has access to cell phones. And in many instances, we have programs that provide them free with internet access. So if we can make those devices available, and now we're in a different season where if there was a belief that cell phones were critical to communication, critical to just our way of life, and thus it became a priority and made available to everyone, even low income, for free. How do we do that? How do we think about technology and devices for our children in the same manner? Because if this is going to be a critical way, a key component of instruction, of teaching and learning, then there shouldn't be a question about access. That should be taken off the board. And I believe that we as a state, as a community, as a country, have the means to make that happen. We've shown that we do. We just have to make it a priority and then move forward.
Right. Yes, you're right. It's a critical issue, you know, and I did some research talking to high schoolers about how they use technology to prepare for college. And they would say, you know, well, I take my cell phone and I go to McDonald's to use the Wi-Fi, or I go to the library, or I stay after school. Well, now with the pandemic, all of those kind of other spaces, you can't do that anymore. So, you know, we have to be even more diligent about expanding access to folks' homes. We can't say go down the street, go to the library, because that's no longer safe for us. So we can all kind of become advocates in that area. So, as folks, and they please put questions in the chat, as we approach our last few minutes, but we have probably 2 more questions. So what are the stakeholders that we need to engage in this moment? And we've already kind of talked a little bit about the community leaders, but what other roles might parents and community leaders play in this?
Well, as we start thinking about planning, one of the things, it is an exciting time, crazy, but exciting, in the sense that we have an opportunity to engage in different kinds of conversations. Because whatever we come up with and whatever we're thinking about, we shouldn't do this in isolation without having everyone at the table and part of the conversation. And I believe in that strongly, and I believe that this is not we're not in a time where just the district administration needs to be making the choices and designing this framework, making these decisions. We need parents at the tables. We need community stakeholders at the tables. We need those IT experts at the tables. We need teachers at the tables. We need our classified support staff members at the table. We need site administrators at the table. So everyone at the table is going to bring a slightly different perspective, but they also bring a slightly different expertise. They bring different resources, and they bring a different lens that I believe is going to only benefit the students that we serve and the families that we serve, because I can't design something to meet your needs if I don't know for sure what your needs are. I'm just designing something based on what I believe your needs are. Well, that belief may not be as accurate as I would like. So I think that it's critical that we have, we find ways to bring everyone into this conversation, whether it's, obviously it's an awfully big table, but there's surveys, there's ways that we can reach out to people and invite and welcome input in a meaningful way, and then circle back and let folks know and understand that this is how we use this information. This is, and we know that you can't make everyone happy all the time, but it is important that we listen. It is important that we listen. And I see in the chat box, this chat box is hot. I love it. They've got some great comments in there. I'm just going, oh, that's a good idea.
Absolutely.
So I just believe that the role that parents and community leaders play is just as important as the role that each of us plays. And I would hope that everyone sees the importance of choosing to be part of the solution. And we know that we have a problem that none of us individually have brought on to ourselves or our community. We have to come together, and what better time than now amidst this pandemic and dealing with this, and what better reason than for our children. We need to come together for the sake of our children to do things in a better way. And I know that we have that capability.
I have 2 comments in terms of stakeholders. And first of all, Dr. Bowers, I amen everything that you have just said as well. The 2 stakeholders, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, that I'm thinking about that we definitely need to engage, and I saw part of this in the chat box, is we definitely need to be talking to politicians for 2 reasons. Number one, funding for supporting all of what we're talking about. We have to, I know that we've had the LCFF, I know that funding has changed in California, but both at the state and federal level, we still need to have more funding supporting all of what we're talking about, not just the devices, the infrastructure, the PD, all of that. We need more. I mean, as good as it is now, we need more. And also, as the politicians are coming up with these laws that I was alluding to with regards to the student data privacy, and don't get me wrong, these need to be laws that are in place. However, I do believe, and I may be going out on a limb here saying this, that some of those laws end up being unfunded mandates, and some of those laws maybe in enacting them or in talking about them, it would be preferable to have educators weighing in on them, because I think that they are well-meaning and I understand exactly why they're there, but I don't believe that sometimes our politicians understand what the net result is going to be in the classroom, and how the way they framed it may actually impede the educational process. So I think that parents can be very, very strong advocates there, along with the education community, in talking to politicians and saying, hey, we need to be involved with these discussions before these laws are kind of pushed out, because they do have an effect that you may not have envisioned. The other thing that I really think would be really important, because we're talking about educators redesigning the experience of students with technology as a foundation, this is a good time to engage even more the CTE community, in my opinion, and also the business community in that, particularly at the upper levels, we are preparing kids for a world that is different than what we were prepared for. Probably 50% of the jobs that a kindergartner will end up in when he or she comes of majority don't even exist yet. So how can we be working with these various experts and community business leaders to talk about what those jobs are going to look like? Obviously, we're not just talking about doctor, policeman, nurse. We're talking about things like, for example, my title, Chief Technology Officer, that did not exist 25 years ago. So how do we continue to build on critical thinking skills and build those technological skills and the various skills that students are going to need when they go out into a world that we really don't know what it's going to look like when they, in 20 years, when they are at that point. And how do we use this as an opportunity to make some of those changes?
Perfect. Yes. And so as we wrap, and that's really, you brought up, Lorrie, opportunities. Dr. Bowers, any other opportunities you think we should be thinking about in this moment? I know we've addressed so many of them. So.
Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep it brief, because I know that this session is coming to a close. I just think the opportunity for all of us to be involved, the folks, I want to say thank you to all the participants today, because they're taking the opportunity to build their capacity and to learn more, so that if we know better, we do better. And that's the opportunity that we all have here. Let's continue learning so that we know better and we'll do better for our kids, and the opportunity to have the will to do the right thing.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we thank you all so much for listening in and participating, and we're grateful. We know CAAASA is going to have many more opportunities for you all to reflect on the opportunities that this moment presents. So thank you to CAAASA, to CCEE, to UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools, and all of the other organizations and stakeholders that came together for this great event. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. This was very, very rich. And even though I'm not in that area, I'm in the other side of the country, it's really beneficial to me as a practitioner, and also as the mother of a son who's a junior in high school and a daughter who's wrapping up her senior year right now. So thank you so much. As I promised at the beginning, I'm about to drop into the chat the link to the survey. So if you would be willing to just take a moment to respond to the survey, we'd really appreciate your feedback. So that link, I just dropped that in the chat just now. Also going to be dropping in, as I mentioned, the Ask the Experts portal, where you can ask other questions that may not have been answered today or that may have come to mind as you were listening today. So that's the next link coming through in the chat. And then the final link is the link I mentioned before too. If any of you are interested in accessing the recording of today's session and the slide presentation, you'll be able to do that here. So that is the final link that I'm putting in the chat right now. Just give us a little bit of time to get the recording uploaded in the slide presentation. So if it's not quite today, don't give up hope. You'll be able to find it there a little bit later. So I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. And if you come to other sessions, you may see me again. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Great.
Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Goodbye.
Bye.